enjoy those moments because they're few and far between, right? Typically, if you're going to have a poor hand, just get okay with it. Just get okay with it, understand that's the deal, and be fine with it. He talks about having a pain file. He says everyone has a pain file. You've got yours, I've got mine. He says he may not have experienced anything quite as traumatic as Cheryl McGinnis, who lost her husband in the September 9/11 tragedies. But he says, here's what I know. These are the pains I've had. What? See if you can relate to any of these. The pain of inexperience. I expected instant success early in my career, but I stumbled a lot because I was immature. I had to learn patience and earn respect and influence from others. He says he learned through the pain of incompetence. He did a lot of counseling early on in his career, found out he was really bad at it, really wasn't good at it, forced him to reevaluate his gifting. The pain of disappointment. He shares that he and his wife were scheduled to adopt a son, and that they lost that child, that they weren't able to complete the adoption, only to 6 months later adopt another child, Joel, who's their son, and of course now with joy of their life as they raise him into adulthood. The pain of conflict. He pastored a church that had a split in the congregation. He lost some people. Conflict is not fun for anybody. The pain of change. Change can be difficult as you have to move to different organizations or change your environment or change your team or change your strategies. The pain of bad health. Bad health can bring some pretty significant changes though, can't it? Like what? What are the good changes that can come out of having poor health? Better eating habits, lifestyle changes? Absolutely. Absolutely. The pain of hard decisions. We have to make tough decisions. Has anybody ever had to make a hard decision? It's not easy, right? The pain of financial loss. The pain of relationship losses. He shares on this one, I think this is interesting. Striving to reach my potential has separated me from friends who had no desire to grow. As I developed new friendships, I learned to build relationships with growing people who wanted to take that journey with me. That's a big part of moving forward, understanding that you're going to become the sum total of the 5 people closest to you. So you got to get real clear on who's around you. And that may mean losing some friendships or changing the way they look. Doesn't mean they have to go away forever, but maybe it changes. The pain of not being number one. It's hard sometimes when you raise your level of competition to say, I'm going to quit being number one and move into a place where now I'm number 5. I've said this before, it's always cracked me up when Matt Dimick will say, 2 years ago he said, I'm the number 6 realtor in the state of Alaska, and I'm the number 10 realtor in the state of Alaska, and I'm number 6 in my own company. Because he plays with the big boys. Well, he could be number 1 at other places, but he was willing to say, I'm not going to be number 1, I'm going to choose to be number 6 because I've got better competition and it's pulling me forward for greater success. The pain of traveling. Sometimes his career had left him on the road a lot. The pain of responsibility. The pain of responsibility. Guys, when you choose to be a leader, you take on a burden. Whether it's a leader of your real estate team, or whether it's a leader of your family, or whether it's being a leader of just the people around you, you understand that that's a responsibility. The typical conversations in my home where I hear that's not fair are usually around leadership. Why do I have to be the bigger person? Why do I always have to be the one to say I'm sorry? Why can't I tell my coach what I really think of him? Because you're a leader. But that's not fair. Yes, it is. Sorry. The pain of responsibility. When you are blessed with ability and leadership, it means you are obligated. It's not a choice. You're obligated to take that higher road. That's tough. It can wear you out. It's not easy. So how do you take your pain and then turn it into gain? So we all agree, right, that we face hard times. We all agree that they're equally dispersed amongst all of us. They look differently in each of our lives, but nobody's exempt. Nobody in this room gets a homework pass from difficulty and pain. He says, well, how do you take that and you turn it into gain? Here's a quote. Experience isn't really the best teacher, but it sure does serve as the best excuse for not trying to do the same silly thing again. He says, if you don't want to keep repeating the same actions over and over that get you the same bad results, he suggests five action steps. Here's your 5 takeaways. This is what you can do. Number one, choose a positive life stance. Did anyone ever play basketball? What's a defensive stance look like? You're down, you're on your toes, your arms are here, so you can defend the pass, the shot, and the dribble, right? There's a specific stance. You watch kids play basketball. If they're on their heels, you know that kid's getting beat. Why? They're flat-footed. First step, and the kid's around them. It's a stance, it's a position, it's an attack position, because you're ready to move, you're ready. So if I'm playing defense on Shayna, and I've got my eye on her middle section, and I'm down low, and my hands are where they're supposed to be, and they're up, and I'm on my toes, no matter what she does, I'm ready to go. If she tries to drive, I can move. If she tries to take a shot, I can block. If she tries to pass, I can deflect it or deny it. That's an action stance. Guys, that's how you have to be in your life. In action. So your life stance is either going to be one of towards everything that comes your way, or it's going to be a positive life stance that says, I'm ready to go. Bring it on. I know it's coming. I'm ready. I'm going to embrace it, and I'm going to get after it. There's an author, Virginia Satir, that says, life is not the way it's supposed to be. It's the way it is. The way you cope with it is what makes the difference. So you have this action stance, and this is what you remember. Number one, life is filled with good and bad. Again, where did we get the expectation that it's supposed to be all great? You know, but we all have it, right? Number two, some of the good and bad I cannot control. I think that's where you give up the worrying piece that takes you negative. Guys, if you can't control it, let it go. What is worrying going to do about it? Eat you up. Keep you up at night, take away your rest, take you away from your family, I mean, you can be sitting there, but you're away from them. Am I the only person in the room that's ever been in that situation? Right in the middle of it, and I realized I couldn't repeat back anything that was just said in the conversation because I was worried about something that I had zero control over. Some of the good and the bad will find me. Not just the bad, some of the good will find you too. It all will. Number four, if I have a positive life stance, the good and the bad will become better. And what's the converse of that? You don't. If I have a negative life stance, the good and bad will become worse. So therefore, what do you choose? Hopefully a positive life stance. Second thing you can do, action step. Number two, embrace and develop your creativity. Here's what I mean by that. I'm just going to read this to you. There's a story about a chicken farmer whose land was flooded nearly every spring. He didn't want to give up his farm and moved, but when the water backed up onto his land and flooded his chicken coops, it was always a struggle to get his chickens to higher ground. Some years he couldn't move fast enough, and hundreds of his chickens would drown. After the worst spring he'd ever experienced and losing his entire flock, he came to the farmhouse and told his wife, I've had it. I can't afford to buy another place. I can't sell this one. I don't know what to do. His wife replied, buy ducks.
Oh, bad. That's called.
I got it from Lindsay.
Here's what she understood. In the face of a problem, that's when sometimes you experience creativity.
Sorry, in the back of the room.
That's okay. At least you don't have a mask on. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Guys, when you're in the middle of bad experiences, you know, let's talk about real estate for a second. When you get burned on something, when you lose a buyer, when something happens, sometimes that's when you figure out everything that you did wrong or that you could have done better to bring. That's a great, I mean, where did that come from to begin with? A buyer rep agreement, which became the Keller Williams Buyer Loyalty Agreement, it came from people getting tired of getting hosed. It came from bad situations. Now we have an incredible document that can at least help protect us. So when you're losing a buyer, you're losing a deal, or something happens, or something's going sideways, you have two choices. You can sit and gripe and moan about it and go stand at the water cooler and tell everybody how awful this lender is and all this stuff. Or you can figure out, okay, what can I do to control this better? What can I do to make this a better situation, right?
Yeah, like what's your DNA on it?
Absolutely. What's my DNA, or what's my system even? Maybe you didn't have any fault. Maybe you just didn't have a great system, and you can come out of it with a phenomenal system. Number three, embrace the value of bad experiences. President John F. Kennedy was once asked how he became a war hero. With his customary dry wit, he responded, it was pretty easy. Someone sunk my boat. It's always easier to see the positive in a negative long after it happens. Right? Like you can look back many, many years ago and go, oh man, that was really bad, but I see all the great stuff that came from it. It's hard to do it when you're in the middle of it. Like, I get that. He says, but that's where, if you can learn to do that, you are ahead of 98% of the population. If you can learn to adopt a positive stance when you're in the middle of those situations, you are so far ahead of the rest of your competition just in life. Let's forget real estate for a second. Does anybody have that realtor that they know that when they call, you know all they're going to do is, there was a gal that Beth and I used to work with, every time you run into her in the hall, house and market, oh my gosh, it was doom and gloom. It didn't matter whether the market was up, down, sideways, flat. You know exactly what I'm talking about too, don't you? Because it was always the end of the world, right? It was just, you just didn't want to talk to her. Wonderful person, loved her to pieces, just didn't want to have that conversation again. Inventor Charles Kettering, who was the head of research for General Motors, said this: "You will never stub your toe standing still. The faster you go, the more chance there is of stubbing your toe, but the more chance you have of getting somewhere." Number 4, and I'll crank through these last two. Make good changes after learning from bad experiences. Not everything that is faced can be changed, because you don't have control over your circumstances. Sometimes what happens to you is just what happens to you. It's not your fault. It's not in your control. It just happens. But nothing can be changed until you face it. So you have to walk through those situations to be able to learn to make changes. Most people don't think their way to positive change; they feel their way. What's the bold law that we've learned? Logic makes us think.
Emotion makes us act.
Emotion is what makes us act. We have to feel pain many times to actually implement change. When we think about it, it sounds great in theory, but when you're in the middle of it, are you really going to take that action? Number 5, take responsibility for your life. You guys ever met that person, you know, that's gone through a really bad marriage, or that they've had something really bad, and they come to you and they're that person? Like, you know that even though they've been divorced for 10 years, the conversation you're going to have is about how horrible their husband was, how awful the divorce was, and just it was just terrible, and that's all they're ever going to talk to you about every single time you see them. We've all met someone like that, right? They've let their circumstances define them. And I know people go through some tough stuff, and I know it can scar you and it can be really difficult. But you can either choose to take responsibility for your life or move forward. Here's what he says. People who overcome bad experiences avoid the label of victim and take responsibility for moving forward. They don't say, what happened to me is the worst thing in the world and I'll never be free of it. They say, what happened to me was pretty bad, but the other people are worse off and I'm not going to give up. Long and short of it, here's where John concludes this chapter. It's sometimes very difficult to see the opportunity in the midst of the pain, but it is there. You must be willing to not only look for it, here's an interesting word, but pursue it. What's the difference between look and pursue?
Pursue means actively chase it.
Now, when I hear the word pursue, I'm thinking about, like, with passion, that I'm chasing something, I'm getting after it, I've got a goal, I'm pursuing it. When I'm looking for something, I'm just kind of standing there. It's hard to think about doing that when you're in the middle of a bad situation. I'm going to pursue change in the middle of this awfulness. And yet, that's when it's most important to do that, because that's when you can find the greatest amount of growth. So that's what I want to leave you with today. Any ahas or thoughts before I wrap it up and get you out of here a couple minutes early?
I had a really bad experience shortly after I moved over here with the buyer that called me back. Frank called, ran out to me with the property. Got burned really bad. Horrible people. And yes, everyone's working with those people. Because of that, that's why I do buyer consultations. I do buyer record readings. I've never done them before. And that's made such a huge difference in my business.
Yep. So bad situation brought you into something of growth. Making faces at me. Yes.
Not on the topic.
Yes.
I have 2 brand new licensees that just passed their test that are looking for teams. One is full-time, probably going to be a go-getter, play D1 hockey. Number 2 is very competitive individual, works a full-time job, and is open to evenings and weekends. So just FYI, if you want their information, come see me.
With 4 barely used masks for sale.
I have to tell you that absolutely made my day. Dude,
They're already on
but you're pretty
Facebook.
witty. This is like the second time you've come up with something. You little Joe Bell. I'm keeping you separated.
That was all his idea yesterday.
That's hilarious. Well, I thank you guys for being here. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope it does help you kind of change your life stance as we're going through the day. You face different and challenging things, and go tear it up this week. Get out of here.
That wasn't that big.
Hey, Joe, what time?